Good morning. It's my privilege to preach on this sixth Sunday after Pentecost. And because my sermon is very much about the gospel reading, I'm going to read that gospel appointed for today for this sixth Sunday after Pentecost, proper 10, before I preach. Here is the gospel. A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen." Hear then the parable of the sower, Jesus goes on to say. "When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is what was sown on the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit, and yields in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God." In the parable of the sower, Jesus is setting the stage for the numerous parables that follow in quick succession. So he makes a lot of this parable. It's setting the stage. I was taught early on that you should never allegorize a parable. The idea is that parables spark the imagination, so you don't want to say too much about their meaning when you're telling a parable. Yet, that is precisely what Jesus does here, attaching hidden meaning to each of the groups of people who tend the seeds that were scattered. Because Jesus does this, there is typically no ambiguity about his opinion of the people in question. But something scholars do debate, if Jesus makes some things very clear and leaves no room for debate, something scholars do debate is who makes up the precise audience at which Jesus was aiming when he told this parable. It may have been directed to the Pharisees, with whom Jesus had had an unpleasant encounter just before. It's not hard to see how he might have compared the Pharisees to the birds that snatched away the message, or with rocky soil so hardened that it could not allow the message to take root. Or Jesus may have been directing the message to the disciples, who, in the face of persecution and rejection, would be tempted to become like the thorns that symbolize people who become so absorbed with the cares of the world that their spiritual development is choked. This parable appears not only in Matthew, but also in Mark and Luke. And in all three, it's told to a huge crowd that has gathered to hear what Jesus has to say. So it must have been considered an important one. One especially significant message for the crowds, and an excellent one for us, has to do with the importance of developing qualities like patience, perseverance, and faithfulness. For if we are to ever become mature in our faith, we will need all of these, and never more so than during this time in which we are living right at this moment. Some time ago, I had an almost literal experience of this parable with slight variations, and if you're a gardener, you may have had similar experiences. At the time, Tom and I had large flower boxes on our deck. It was late spring, and we had procrastinated in getting started with our planting. So when we realized that we were having an outdoor party in just a few days, we rushed out and bought plants. Not seeds, but plants. There was no time for seeds to mature. We had to have instant results. So we bought many plants that were already maturing and had beautiful blossoms. We wanted it to look good for the party. Guess what happened? After I transplanted them, those plants looked great for about a day. However, the root structure was not yet adequate to support them, so very soon the blossoms began to fall off. You should have seen them. No, actually, you should not have seen them. We had also, fortunately, bought some plants that were less mature. They didn't have flowers yet. They had little buds, but they weren't yet flowers. But at least they had potential. And with nurture and patience, they eventually provided us with beauty and enjoyment for the rest of the summer. On first hearing, this parable appears to be concerned with where we focus our efforts to live as Christ's servants. Or you might read it as saying we should just scatter our gospel seeds all over the place and let them fall where they may. Forget focus. But a closer reading, especially one that includes Jesus' explanation, makes it clear that the main concern is what distinguishes those who live the good news effectively from those who do not. And of course, it follows that we do well to follow the examples of the former, those who live the gospel effectively. Of the several hearers described, let me focus on just one who may be especially helpful to us at this particular time. Listen to Jesus again. As for what was sown on rocky ground, that's where I want to focus, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, the good news, that person immediately falls away. I choose this specific description because one of the besetting sins of our culture is a lack of patience and seeking immediate gratification. I also choose it because it's difficult for any of us to persevere and be patient when we are already sick to death of having to live in a way that is highly unnatural and vexing to most of us, the way we have to live at this time. Further, I choose it, this example, because we at All Saints have been waiting a long time for life to return to normal with a new clergy leader. And finally, I choose this among Jesus' examples in the parable because some among us will feel frustrated and impatient when Jay finally does arrive, and instead of saying, "Now that I'm here, your search is ended. Rejoice and get comfortable," instead of saying that, he will say, "Let us now begin a new search together. Let us begin a process of discernment in order that God might lead us to greater clarity about our mission, about how we, the community of all saints, are called to serve one another, to serve the community around us, and to serve God's larger creation, and all of these faithfully." We may be tempted to say, "Oh, shut up. Just tell us what to do." Or, to use the words of the parable, having received our new rector with joy, we might soon become impatient and fall away, like the plant whose seeds fell on rocky ground and whose root had no depth. Since the coronavirus struck, we've all heard it said again and again ad nauseum that when we finally do return to normal, the new normal won't be like the old normal. Well, the same is true for All Saints. I initially approached this parable with a lack of enthusiasm. It seems to me, I read it for the 1,000th time, and this parable, for me at least, lacks the bite, the compelling story, or the clear, powerful message of some of my favorites, like the prodigal son and the Good Samaritan. But in reality, the message of the sower is a gift for me and for all of us, especially now at this time. It's good to be reminded of the benefits that come with taking time to find good soil in which we can bloom and endure, both as individuals and as a community. This parable is inviting us to pay as much attention to the journey we're on as to the destination we seek. As C.S. Lewis once said, and I believe it was in Surprised by Joy, and I'm paraphrasing, "The only place we can be sure of finding God is in the present, where God is always active. We do well to avoid getting stuck in the past, which we tend always to remember as having been better than it actually was. Similarly, we do well to avoid living too much in a future that may never even come to pass." Amen.